Okay, I'll make this shorter than the first time I did this so that you guys can maximize your time on a Friday. In fact, here's all you need to know. I pay you equitably. That's it. Thank you very much for coming. So how many of you guys have been dealing with the Pay Equity Act already? How many of you guys have been, I know, let's be honest, I know some of you guys are ignoring it because you feel like it hasn't happened yet. But, meaning you've changed the way you've been talking about compensation. So give me some sense of how it's gone, where the issues are. Bill. Good. Okay. Okay. Done, same? Right. What's the awareness level of the clients and candidates based on your experience? High, Bill? Yeah? Yes, I think that's mixed. That's interesting. But are they offering it up because they think that's the way it's always been, and they don't know there's any difference? Or are they saying, I don't care what the law says, here's what I'm making? What's the awareness of the candidates and clients of the law, do you think? Pretty low. And you guys are working in a local market where it hasn't been in place, until technically now anyways, although it's been in place in 8 other states and pending in 26 others. Chair?
Clients expect us to get that information.
Right.
And they really don't care about what because they're paying candidates to find these people. As far as the people are concerned,
when you say clients, are you talking about the line managers or the HR people? Because I'd be surprised if an HR person said, I don't care what the law says, I want the money.
Line people. But from a candidate perspective, I think candidates that have worked with recruiters understand that there's a commonality, on compensation between the two of us. And I always ask, well, what is your target compensation? What do you want?
Right.
What's your package look like? I always open with that question.
Mm-hmm.
And they go quite clear. They're very clear on everything. I was doing one yesterday. There's a whole bunch of moving parts in that one.
You're talking about to the client now?
The candidate.
Okay. What does your package look like? Is not appropriate. It's not appropriate in a lot of ways. Let's be honest, but it's not an appropriate question. No, that breaks the law. In my opinion, that would break the law.
Breaks the law.
Sure, because that's asking for a number. You're asking for a number. What does your package look like? Means I'm going to have to say, I'm making 100,000 and stop it. I'm making 100,000 and with this, right? So that's inappropriate. So here's the thing, right? First of all, Jared makes a really great point. To me, the hardest part of this is there's 2 potential exposures to Hobson Associates, right? And this is not just a CEO's concern. This should be a concern of partners too, because the 2 things you never have to worry about here, hopefully, is the IRS. I pay all our taxes. If I remember being a worker bee and thinking, does John Hobson pay his taxes? Because that's the fastest way a company gets shut down, right? The IRS has a lot of power. So I pay my taxes. I pay all our bills, right? And I run the company in an ethical way. So the other concern you have to have is somebody losing some big legal battle, right? And it's an extremely litigious society. So there's 2 worries here. On the candidate side, Brian's working with some guy who can't get a job because he doesn't deserve to get a job because he's a horrible candidate. But he gets out on an interview through Brian, and Brian asks, what are you making? And he says, I'm making X. Then he finds out about this law, and he's sitting home, and he goes, well, this beats the hell out of being unemployed. And he gets some lawyer, and believe me, there's some lawyer out there who will take it, probably take it on contingency. And they sue for, this guy's 31 years old, he could have worked for 35 more years, and then he's got emotional distress, so we're suing for $17 million. And I got a few bucks in the bank, but I don't have $17 million. So that may sound crazy. Look in the papers at crazy lawsuits, and you'll see what happens. So there's two exposures. One is the candidate saying, that's the only way I get some money out of this is by saying they asked me that question and they can't ask me that question, right? So there is some exposure here, so we have to take it seriously. And then, but the other one is the one Jerry's talking about, which is, A, the clients could say, that's a stupid law, I'm asking anyways. Well, that's on them. If they break the law and Brian doesn't, then that's on them. And they'll get a lawsuit at some point or fired for it, right? That's why I'm saying it's probably a line manager, not in HR. I do think you're right, that at least for the near term, there's an expectation on the client side, that they've had for a long time. Like, if I use Rachel, she's supposed to get this information for me. That's part of the fee I've been paying. And if they're not aware of the law, or if they, quote, think the law is stupid, well, that's on them. Because we're not going to break the law in order to get a single job order, because I promise you that'll come back to bite. So, look, it was in Massachusetts and New Jersey and California from 2016 to 2018. The last time I talked about this, I said there is a possibility, because when Trump came in, he became the anti-regulation president. He just lifted all regulations. He's like, screw it, let business do what business wants to do. And everyone said this Pay Equity Act, which had gotten to a certain tipping point, would either get stopped in its tracks, and it would just be in a few blue states, or it's reached a tipping point, and even Trump's anti-regulation isn't going to change it. Well, you know some of the answers. Nebraska, boom. Connecticut, boom. The Pay Equity Act seems to have gotten too far for even an anti-regulation administration to stop it. So that tells me that it will probably continue. So if you're someone like Kyle, who's working primarily local, but does work a few jobs all over the country, right? I think it's crazy for you, same thing for you, Dan. I think it'd be crazy for you to say, look, I'm just going to find out where the candidate comes from, and what state is that, and if it's, Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania doesn't have it, then I can ask him that question. But, this next guy I talked to a half an hour later, what state is he from? Can I ask him that question? What about this job order? Where is that client? That's madness. That's madness to me. I think it makes more sense to just adopt this phraseology, language, make this change mentally, treat everybody the same. You can't ever get caught. It seems to me to make more sense, right? Has anybody had an issue? I do remember one Pennsylvania company. I'm not sure who, maybe they're not in this room yet. There was a Pennsylvania company who was furious that we didn't have the money. We told them that's what the law is, because the job was in Boston, obviously Massachusetts. And he said, well, it's not in Pennsylvania. I'm going to ask him. And you should ask him because the job's in Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, the job was in Boston, but the Pennsylvania client was furious. And we were like, that's the law in Massachusetts, and that's where the job is. What do you want me to tell you? And we had a really angry client that I had to do a manager service call on. But that's the only one I remember. Does anybody have another one? Dan?
Well, I do a lot of, or we create a lot of recruiting in Houston.
Right.
Where there's Texas Overconference.
That's correct.
And I tried to mention to Shivani, shortly after probably the first meeting we had, that I didn't get.
That's their HR person, yeah.
Yeah, that I didn't get the money because of the pay equity laws that were in effect, and she just sort of laughed at me. It's not even on her radar.
Right.
So, I just treated everything I did for her, like the old way, the money,
Right.
I don't know what else to do.
Right, right. And I think it's probably pretty fair to say that certain red states like Texas, although Nebraska's a pretty red state, so it was pretty surprising that Nebraska went. But yeah, Texas will probably be the last bastion of the old ways. But, I just don't know why you'd want to fool with it. So for those of you who sort of had your eyes glazed over because I said it's not in Connecticut yet and it's only in 2 states, and you were like, okay, 48 out of 50, I can daydream during this meeting. Let me just run you through what we're talking about here. Again, the reason for the law. It's a horrible number, and the law is well intended. Full-time working women are paid 80% of what men earn for the same jobs. That was true in 2016 when Massachusetts created the law. It had been true for the previous 50 years. Actually, 80% was as low a number as it had been. There are still some states where that number is 91, 92%. I mean, it's horrible. You do the same job, And we're not aware of this so much here, right? I was shocked. I'm steeped in this stuff, and I try to read all this stuff, and when I read that number, I was like, really? Like, they only get 80%? But that's because I'm in sales. And I have a general manager that runs Hobson, who's a woman. I wouldn't even think about gender. And Joe runs according to Danny, and you guys have the same comp plans. It doesn't matter in sales, right? That's the beauty of sales. Old, young, right? Man, woman, who cares about your ethnicity? Can you make sales or can't you? You all have the same comp plan. That's not how corporate America works, right? Why did this start? Well, I mean, it's a socio-economic thing. There was a time in America, a long time, where the nuclear family was a man in a job, a woman staying at home, and 2 kids. Therefore, when it came time to pay, they'd say, well, we got to pay Mike a little bit more because he's the breadwinner. And she's the mom. So her job isn't as important. It sounds crazy to us now. But they felt they were doing the right thing for 100 years in America. But it's a 2-income nation, right? And 60% of the people in college are women. And there's a lot of women, including in this office, who do a lot better than the men. They should make more money. It's just not fair, right? So Massachusetts, to their credit, said we got to do something about this. And they were the first to ban employers from seeking information about your compensation history in the hiring process. So the employers are prohibited from seeking the compensation history of an employer prior to making an offer, unless, and this is a big unless the prospective employee voluntarily discloses the information. If the employee voluntarily discloses the information, all bets are off. So if Lindsay's interviewing some underwriter and he or she doesn't know the law or doesn't care about the law or sees it as an advantage to talk about her compensation for whatever reason or is bragging about her compensation, doesn't matter the reason. If she says, hey, Lindsay, I am looking, I'm interested in that job. By the way, I'm making $72K. And I can get your references whenever you want. Okay, Lindsay now can give that information to the client. She's doing nothing wrong. She's breaking no laws. If that person volunteers the information, all bets are off. What's the problem with this? Sounds great when you're writing a law, and you're a lawyer writing a law. Some employment lawyer wrote this law. But what's the problem with that? Well, if this thing was being adjudicated, if somebody sues and says, no, I'm telling you, Kevin, I did not say to Kevin Bracken that I was making $72,000. And Kevin's sitting there going, you absolutely did. Like, I follow the pay equity law. I only told the company because you told me. Right? He said, she said. It's he said, she said. Right? So if somebody volunteers their information and you want to follow this Pay Equity Act correctly, get it in email. Get it in an email. It better be documentable. Otherwise, you're going to get into, I did not tell him that. And then, now what do? Do we try to find the phone transcript? Well, the phone transcript can't be used in a court anyways, and it gets messy. Has it ever gotten messy? No. But could it get messy? Yes. And I have to worry about the legality of this. Chris?
Does this apply to, if you go on any website, I had a lot of candidates ask me, how you fill out information, ask your salary recommendation, you can't put in a motion, you have to put in a dollar amount.
Right.
I put some of my candidates go on here and they ask me, what should I put on here? This is what I'm looking for, what they put more on table or something, whatever.
Yeah.
Does that law apply to online applications and that kind of platform as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. Most of those applications will go away or will take that away, right, over time. But for now, if somebody were to see it, and you're right, some of them are set up like you can't go to the next screen unless you fill that in, right? I would take the same logical approach, which is you told me your target income was 110. I can't legally ask you what you're making. If that's your target income, put it down. Put it down. I would encourage you not to get greedy or crazy because you might never get an interview because who knows what they're paying. But if that's your target income, put it down. But you certainly can't say, well, in that case, since it's a data sheet and not a phone call, you can give, no, they can't ask. So they're literally breaking the law by not changing those data sheets. But it's a very good point. Like, these legacy systems are in place, right? So they passed the Pay Equity Act, and then somebody finally realizes 3 years later, oh, shoot, we still have that question on our data sheet. Somebody ought to get that off, right? But they'll disappear over time. Good, Joe. So to show you how powerful this is, and this is amazing when you think about how search firms that were well run like ours, we've actually been guilty of this. It's been shown that employees who begin their careers on a lower salary track continue to be paid lower, and the gap in pay increases over time. This is known as the start low, stay low phenomenon. So, I saw an article about this in the New York Times, and it's devastating. Well, literally, if some woman who's been under the 80% rule starts at 22 years old at 80% of what the guy makes, over a period of time, you look at that woman's 401k when she's 65, and she makes a whole lot less money. She has less in retirement. She has less assets, having worked 35 years doing the same job as some guy because of her gender. So this has real long-lasting effects on people's lives. So it's that rare law that really does have good intentions. The hard part is in the execution. So the law has teeth. What do they get if you violate the law? Wages and interest, plus an equal amount as liquidated damages, plus reasonable attorney's fees. That's a hilarious sentence in and of itself. There's no such thing. The suit must be commenced within 3 years after the alleged violation. And here's the killer part. Pay violation occurs each time an employee is paid. So theoretically, that employee could sue for every week's paycheck that they received. So if I sue after 2.5 years, I'm still within the 3 years, and I can say that I was emotionally damaged for every time I looked at my paycheck, knowing it wasn't as much as Bill, who was sitting across the cubicle doing the same job. And some lawyer would milk the hell out of that. Here's the good news. And if you listen to the podcast I did with a corporate lawyer who does employment work, she said, no offense, Hobson and other search firms, they're not going to go after you. A, companies like us have errors and emissions insurance, so we'd be covered. But B, you don't have the money. This happens at UTC, and they're going after UTC, right? Because they got millions and millions and millions and millions and millions, right? So this is designed to go after corporate America for asking, not for the agents. At the same time, you're still considered liable. So they could sue you and the search firm, or the company. The onus is on the company to prove that they have an equitable, transparent system. They have to, according to this law, now prove that their compensation is fair and that they pay Jennifer the same amount they pay Kyle. And they have to have record retention, so now they've created this whole database requirement. It's a lot of extra legal work for these companies, so they're furious about this law. They have to hire more people. They have to keep these records, and they have this legal exposure. On top of, as Jerry says, getting annoyed that they don't have the information to work with that they used to have. I used to know so you can assume how these clients get mad, right? Because in the old days, Jerry tells Brian what Rachel's making, and then they make an offer accordingly. And the client is saying to Jerry, you're telling me I got to make up a number for an offer, see what she says, and then make another offer because I can't get her number? That's a joke. Yeah, well, it's not a joke anymore. Now it's a law. And that's because for a lot of years, you were screwing over these women. And it ain't going to happen anymore, right? So 2 things are important on this slide. One is the affirmative defense, meaning companies have to complete a self-evaluation of their pay practices that is reasonable in detail and scope or show that they've made reasonable progress. So in other words, as they always do with these laws, they've given these companies an out. In other words, they're going to say, look, yeah, we did it. We were absolutely biased toward men for 100 years. We're putting together these new pay practices, and here's a report of our reasonable progress. That's going to hold up in a court, right? And then the other thing they gave them, and this is really important for you, in every one of these pay equity acts that I've seen, in Connecticut's is really just a ripoff of Massachusetts. I read through it. California's is very, very similar. New Jersey's is very similar. They give outs, meaning every pay equity act has exceptions, just like every law has an exemption, right? So there are exemptions in certain states. So in other words, like in Massachusetts, location is used. So in Massachusetts, the first Pay Equity Act state, it's illegal to pay you more than you unless you can show me a locational reason why that's the case. And indeed, in Massachusetts, they can say, yes, we pay Brian more than we pay Rachel for the same job, but that's because she lives on the eastern part of the state, or I'm sorry, the western part of the state, in the Berkshires, where the cost of living is low, and he lives in Boston. And we need to attract candidates to Boston, where the cost of living is higher. So because of the location, we're paying him more for the same job. And that is considered okay. That's an exemption. There are exemptions for responsibilities. There's exemptions for, and this is important for most of you, there's exemptions in most of the laws for sales. In other words, they say, if someone's primarily responsible for revenue, then we can say, yes, we pay Joe more than we pay Jen because he's a big hitter with major accounts and a track record for a lot of sales, and she's a newbie. It's not because she's a woman, it's because she doesn't sell as well or as much. Well, okay, then what's the point of the Pay Equity Act, right? But I get it. That's what they're doing. In certain states, they're making exemptions. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. As the Pay Equity Act goes, they may dilute this law like crazy. They might completely water this law out by giving so many exemptions that it loses its meaning, or people might catch on to this and toughen it up. Too early to tell. Still only a handful of states that do it. I mean, one of them has tenure. No, we don't have any sort of prejudice against women, but we do pay people more for tenure. So now they can say they're paying Bill more, not because he's a guy, but because he's been here 22 years. I'm sure there's an awful lot of lawyers who would say that's not the point of the law. So look, all of these are going to be a little different. Over time, if you work a local market, we'll dig into that Connecticut market Equity Act law and see if there's any exemptions for Connecticut and see what we've got. But I think it's just cleaner to do what Bill's done, what Larry's done, what Don's done, and just go full bore, Pay Equity Act, protect yourself. And you'll find as I walk you through this verbiage, it's not that different. Larry. Sure. Yep.
Well, I would think that
completely okay. Completely okay.
And then sales engineers, it's kind of important for Bill and I to understand that sales engineers get paid usually either 70% base, 30% is commissions, 80-20. So I've been asking about the numbers, but are you on a 70-30 plan and 80-20? What's the breakdown?
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and that's a great way to look at it. How questions are okay, what questions are not. How it's structured. The blueprint of your, percentage of commissions versus salary, perfectly fine. You can't ask the number. The law says, until Kyle makes an offer to Mike, you can't find out what Mike is making. Because you're going to be biased by it. If I tell you Mike is making 75, but I was planning on paying 100, aha, I'm not paying some joker who's making 75, 100. Now that offer's 83.5. It doesn't take a smart person to realize to some degree there's an advantage to this law to us. In fact, it happened to Kyle, I remember. I can't remember the guy's name, but it was a guy that was making like 93,000, but you didn't know that at the time because you were doing your Pay Equity Act, and you said, what are you looking for? He said 115, I think was the number. You made the placement, and then you found out after the fact, because you said, hey, congratulations, you start in a couple weeks. And he said, yeah, dude, this is a good deal for me. I'm only making 90, right? And okay, in this case, it benefited a guy, which is not what the law is about, and it benefited Kyle, which is not what the law is about. But it also could have happened to a woman. And the point is, yeah, these candidates are no longer going to be treated based on what they're currently making, but what we're planning on paying, what our budget has, and what the market demands. Right, if this turns into a recession, believe me, this law will lose all its power. And if people are unemployed, they'll say, look, I was making X. But right now, this act has a lot of power. Kyle.
I had a couple things, but based on what Larry talked about,
Right.
Jerry, I want to offer you 80K for the client. So that, okay, and the offer is now out, so now we can talk about what you're earning, if the client's asking us to or something like that, or we have to wait till official offer comes through an email or whatever. Like, is there anything like
Oh, that's interesting. I would say you're at risk if you were to say there was a verbal offer. No, it'd have to be a written offer because the law says until an offer is made, which I'm sure they define as a written offer. Once a written offer is made, then you can say things like, Brian, the offer is 115. Well, I want more. Well, how far off is this? Well, I'm making 95. Perfectly appropriate conversation. You can't try to get him to tell you what he's making before they make the offer. But, yeah, consider the written offer the actual offer because, again, you're going to get into he said, she said, right? The company's going to say, we didn't actually make an offer because they're going to sue the company first, right? And let's keep in mind, you may not get sued, but you're going to lose that client real fast. So let me walk you through some of the verbiage, and Joanne will give you these slides. They're already in according to Danny, but Joanne can just email you these. First with the client. To take the pressure off. It shouldn't be a big deal with HR people because HR people should be getting seminars left and right. The lawyer on the podcast said it's a huge boon for the legal industry. Every law firm and their brother, it's like a dermatologist offering Botox. Like every lawyer is putting together seminars on pay equity acts and going to companies, right? But this is the best way to, in taking a job order, when you get to compensation, now you can't, it's not like the old days, so now you have to say, because you don't know what they know about the Pay Equity Act, in light of the new pay equity laws, it's important we discuss your compensation targets and boundaries. Right? So if you I think the simplest way to do this is just think about targets. Right? If you're talking to the client about what's the target amount they want to pay, and you're talking to candidates about what's your target income, and match targets, you can't get into trouble. You can't get into trouble. I kind of think this is a bonus about our business because if in the old days you're like, what's your salary range? And they go, well, 70 to 90. And then no matter how many times I tell you not to do this in training, then you go to a candidate and say, it pays 90. And he gets an offer of 80 and he's pissed, although it's actually in the midpoint. This takes that away because you won't get that range in the beginning. Now, the company could, in response to this, say, yeah, I know about the pay equity. I paid the last guy 90. I can go to 100. I don't want to. That's fine. On the client side, it's not that different, and you can get specific numbers. But it is important to introduce the idea that we're going to respect the Pay Equity Act, right? So in this case, if they were to say, what are you talking about? I don't doubt that you've probably heard about this, and I don't blame you for not knowing. But the Pay Equity Act is spreading all across the country. It's in many states. It'll be in all of them. So at Hobson Associates, we respect it with all our candidates because we work nationally. We cannot ask a candidate what they're earning before you make an offer, and neither can you. So I may have just saved you a lawsuit. Or they'll say, yeah, I get it, we know all that, which I think you'll get more and more of, right? But this is the way I'd introduce it in a job order.
And it's in our contract, so
Yeah.
look, if you're using some old contract from 2015 Hobson, better check that back.
Right.
To send out the new contracts for contingent and engagement fee contracts, I think like March of last year.
Right. And it just says Hobson respects Hobson respects Pay Equity Act laws where applicable, right? So that they know that you and that's important for us because if we have that in the reason I put it in that agreement is because if we ever go to court, we can say, this is our policy. The client knew that we respect the Pay Equity Act. So that's on, if somebody asked, it was them, not us, right?
You don't have it, but you don't.
Yeah. Really important, I think, to establish the comp of the last person in the position with the new Pay Equity Act because then you'll get real numbers. So the point of this is to try to get real numbers. So when you're talking about what's your target, what do you want to pay these people? Well, I want to pay them 100. What'd you pay the last guy? 120. Okay, they can pay 120, right? So establish the comp of the last person. See if there's any flexibility. Done.
on that one, a lot of companies encroach on it. I'm sure that's what I do, or startups, pre-revenue.
Yeah.
Is it okay to use that with last company?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And it's okay, by the way, I don't want you guys to lose your expertise. There's nothing wrong with, and I know you hear this question a lot, you're the expert, what do these jobs pay? Okay, this is not part of the Pay Equity Act. You can do that. Oh, I've seen a lot of these jobs in the last year, somewhere between 130 and 180. Some of them go up to 250. You're not breaking any laws here. So don't be afraid to use your expertise and give an opinion as to salary, especially with these early ramped-up companies, right? But I'm talking about later is when we have to be concerned when we get down to offers. So let's make it as basic as we can. If you look at the way we've trained for 100 years, right, and it's made us all a lot of money, and this is the hard part, right? It's the hardest part is to let go of something that you're used to doing, and you know that it's always been effective. But in this case, you don't have to lose much, and I actually think it can be to your advantage. So, old school. Candidate says, what does it pay? And we've always taught, well, that depends on a couple of things. Now, keep in mind, what your competition's always said is, it pays between 70 and 100. They gave me a salary range of 70 to 100, which is horrible and gets you into trouble. We've always said, what's it pay? Depends on two things, what you're currently earning and how well you interview. Obviously, we can't figure out that until you interview, but we can figure out the first one. What are you making? I'm making 85. Okay, well, we normally see is if you interview well, they give you a reasonable increase, which has generally been around 8 to 10% historically. So someone making 85 is going to make somewhere around $93,000, $95,000. Does that make sense? It's not a get-rich-quick scheme. I don't want to get you into this if that's unreasonable. And now you have a conversation. He goes, well, I was looking for 100. Where's that come from? Is that groceries? You guys know how to do that conversation. That is literally illegal now, right? And if it annoys you, think about how I feel. I created this. It's like, thanks very much, right? I'm known for this, and it's now illegal, right? You can't ask what that current salary is. And that's an important sales tool for us. So how do we replicate it and abide by the law? Fair question. Look, I deal in trust and clarity, so I won't waste your time. I got a target comp of $120,000 from the company, which is, right, you're in the job order. What's your target comp? Now, what's the real number? I said I got a target comp of 120. What did the company probably tell me when I said, what's your target comp? Yeah, 100 to 130 maybe 110 to 140. And I said I got a target comp of 120, right? So I'm still negotiating, abiding by the law, and using the same sales concept. You'd be an idiot if you said I got a target comp of 140. Even if you were honest and said, I got a target comp top end, just want to make sure I'm just trying to be a straight shooter. They couldn't pay a dime more than 140. The average candidate thinks that's a midpoint. So you're not playing the game as well as they're playing it, and they're going to expect to get 150. And that's where you get in trouble. So this is a midpoint. This isn't the top end. So I say, I don't want to waste your time. I got a target comp of 120K. What are your thoughts? That's it. It basically replaces the old conversation. It's just as effective, right? Because, again, when I say, what are your thoughts, what could that person possibly say to that? Bill? And they just volunteered their compensation, all bets are off. Right. Which is what, just before the conversation, Jeff Vernick said, I heard this, you do this in Pinnacle, so I'm not going to go to the meeting. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. He said, plus, he said, this works like a charm for me. They volunteered as soon as I do this. So he says, I don't get it. You're making a big deal out of nothing. It's game over. Okay, fine. What are your thoughts? You're either going to get, I'm making this, or they may say, and Jody in California says, 1 out of 3 or 4 times, because California did it early, she says 1 out of 3 or 4 times, they say to her, you can't ask me that. If she says, what are you making? You can't ask me that. Right? So at some point, it makes you look like an amateur if you don't know the law. So to me, you want to be hip anyways, and you want to be state-of-the-art. So you don't want to have somebody say, you can't ask me that. But the other answer to this, what are your thoughts, is, well, I'm not going to give you my salary, and I know I don't have to, but that's low for me. Okay. Now you can ask a whole bunch of questions. How far off are we? Like 20 grand. Okay, I think I can do that math. 120 minus 20, he's making 100 thereabouts. Right? So you can ask how far off are we? What would we need to do? You simply can't say, what are you making? Right? By the way, it covers everything. They define this as all forms of enumeration. So you can't say, what is your, you can't play cute and say, I didn't ask him his salary, but I asked him what his his OTE was, or what his bonus was, or what his commit. No, it's all forms of enumeration. You can't ask for a total. You can ask for a W-2. I had somebody at a seminar recently say, can I ask what his W-2 is? That's not asking his salary. No, go to the back of the class. No, you can't, right? Don't try to be too cute for this rule. It's not important to be cute. You can look at this and say, let's say he says that's too low for me. Well, targets can be adjusted depending on skill sets and other relevant factors. So who knows? Maybe they would go higher. But I would need to know more about you and whether you're a good fit and blah, blah, blah. And by the way, and don't worry, this doesn't jinx you. Joe's got a very big deal hanging, and if he gets it, one of the reasons he gets it was because he got a highly overqualified person for one job, and he submitted him. And they went, oh, yeah, we have this other job, this other higher-end job. Well, thanks. Could you have let me know about that? No, they're not going to let you know about it. But he submitted an overqualified person. The candidates are playing a game with you. The clients are playing a game with you. They can pay more. They think you're jacking them up for higher fees. So if in this case, the guy said, well, no, that's nowhere near enough. Well, targets can be adjusted depending on skill sets. Is it worth talking about? Are we even in the ballpark? Well, we're in the ballpark, but I'd need like 150. Submit that person. For Christ's sakes, it's 3.7% unemployment, and people are dying for people. They'll find the 150. Submit them, right? So you can say things like, how does it compare to your current situation? This is Larry's question. You can ask how questions. You can't ask what questions, right? So take the last two slides to heart, because that's the essence of this thing. That's the ballgame right there. Did I see a hand? Kyle.
After your first training, so I built some of the things when I qualified.
Right.
Very nervous at first, right? Like, I'm going to screw this up.
Right.
Break the law, whatever. Took it very seriously, but then, I learned kind of quickly that every once in a while, like, I was actually getting, like, very favorable responses from candidates. And I would walk them through it. I'd be like, hey, what's your target? And then we talk. Or sometimes they'd say, you probably want to know what I'm making and stuff. And then I would explain a lot to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then another information, maybe on the company, all this stuff, and like little stuff I'd add in to kind of build rapport, build trust. But the pay equity stuff, I thought was like an advantage after a while.
Totally.
I have to say, nobody's ever said this.
No doubt.
10 recruiters call me a week.
No doubt.
I'm the only person that ever walked me.
Right, and if you think about it, I never 25 years ago got a candidate saying, what do you do for me? Right? Because back then, what I did for you was I have the jobs and you don't. Right? I'm the one that got the job. It wasn't like these jobs were posted anywhere. Nowadays, you've got candidates saying, what exactly do you do? Like there's postings everywhere. I get Indeed and other recruiters, and why would I talk to you in any detail? I can just post to these things. The value of the recruiter gets enhanced by you saying, okay, before we get into this, Kevin, are you aware of the Pay Equity Act? You should play it up. It's one of the advantages of dealing with Hobson Associates. We know the law, we know the ethics, we've been in business a long time, we work at a different level. I guarantee you, Joanne and I, every time we do a rookie retreat and talk about the Pay Equity Act, it's now 2019, this came out in 2016, I've been talking about it for over 2 years, and still 80% of the people in my retreats go, what the hell are you talking about? So you know they're still asking, right? And they're going to, at some point, piss off some clients. Okay, a couple things I think are interesting here, too, and relevant. It's more important than ever to have that aspirational conversation with the candidate in the beginning and say, let's talk about how I'm paid. Are you aware of how I'm paid? And either they're going to say, yeah, the company pays, or they're going to say, I assume the company pays because they think you're asking for money. Either way, again, you're talking about trust. This is how you get trust with a candidate in the pay equity world. It's more important than ever, given the Pay Equity Act, since you're not going to know their numbers, to say, Larry, I want to make sure you understand how this works. I am paid based on your wages. The more you make, the more I make. With the exception of your spouse, nobody cares more about you making money than me. So when we get into negotiations, I need you to understand that. If I think you're asking for so much you're going to blow the deal and it's a job you want, I'm going to tell you, dude, we're going to blow this. And I'm in it with you because the more you make, the more I make. I'd love for you to get top dollar. But at some point, if you get crazy greedy, I'm going to call you on it. Is that cool? And they'll say, yeah. Okay. At the same time, I promise you, if I think you're being lowballed, I'm going to go fight for the money because the more you make, the more I make. And if you have that conversation, then you take 90% of candidates think you're on the side of the client against them. And if you can be one of the few people that makes them feel like, no, I'm on your side against the clients, the greedy bureaucratic clients, then you got to win. Then you got to trust. Then they're more likely to volunteer that information. Go.
I just came from selling my house. I went to my realtor, where it's 5% commission, and I said to her 3 times, should I drop the price to 20%? And I'm thinking, I'm here to sell you. I would drop the price. And it was selfish on her part by saying that.
Right.
And no, you're going to sell it for more.
Right.
I want more.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Kind of idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Right. And you question her allegiances and you question her motivations. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. This I think is interesting too, because we had this a couple times early on in California. Stacy said, "What if they ask for? If they know the Pay Equity Act, they're going to ask for something crazy because they can't be caught." Right. So one of the interesting questions I've gotten, and nobody's given me the answer, and even the lawyer didn't know the answer on the podcast. Can they, after the fact? So let's say I'm making 80. I know the Pay Equity Act, and I play the system, and I get $130,000. I get more than my freaking boss was making, right? Could the company then say, okay, here's the offer, $130,000. Now that offer is contingent on verifying references, including his salary? Interesting question. Don't know the answer. I do know this, though. The company is unlikely to withdraw the offer at that point, right? So I don't know if it's legal for them. Are they violating the Pay Equity Act to ask for a salary verification since it's after the offer? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I suspect it doesn't matter because they've already decided to pay the guy $130,000. They're probably not going to do it unless it's ridiculous, right? If the guy's making 60, they're going to feel like this guy's a scam artist, I guess. But I have yet to see it tested. But I said to Stacy, you don't have to worry about it because this is what I would say to the candidate. Let's be honest with each other. Pay Equity Act, they can't ask you what you're making. But they're interviewing a lot of people with the same background. And if you ask for something crazy, the market realities will backfire and you won't be the one getting the offer. So yes, the Pay Equity Act allows you to get crazy and ask for a crazy number, but the market knows what's crazy. Notice how your realtor didn't ask for $150,000 more than the listing price, right? Because it's crazy. It's like you can ask for whatever you want. You're not going to sell it for that, right? The same thing's true here. So people always ask me in retreats, this gives them permission to ask for crazy numbers. No, it gives them permission to ask for aggressive numbers. It gives them permission to ask for payback numbers. The crazy numbers will get lost in the wash because the market will take care of it. Is that it, Joe? Was that the last one? Okay, yeah. So discussing money on an interview, some basics remain. You still will say to a candidate when you're prepping them for an interview, money shouldn't come up on the first interview. If it does, it's a good sign. And the loss and the rule still applies. You can defer any conversations about money to me as your agent if you'd like. But if you feel that comfortable talking about it, you can say, as I'm sure Kevin told you, my target income is X. Right? Whereas in the old days, we would say, you can say I'm currently making X. So this is the only change here. As I'm sure Dan told you, my target income is X. But it's too soon to talk about money. I realize it's the first interview. We can worry about that when we get to offer. I'm sure you'll make a fair offer. So this basic part pretty much stays the same on the prep. And then I would also recommend to people the power of volunteering their comp. So I've done this with a couple of people I've mentored, and it worked really well. So now you use the law. So now you get down to the second or offer interview. And you say, all right, Larry, we're coming down to brass tacks. This is going to be a final interview. I'm going to suggest something. Remember, the more you make, the more I make. We're in this together. But I just want you to know this Pay Equity Act that we've been talking about gives you, potentially, it's up to you, gives you some leverage if you want to use it. In other words, if there's 3 or 4 people interviewing, and the client's trying to make a decision, and he asks every single one of them, what are you looking for? What are you making? And they all say, you can't ask me that. Make me an offer. That's the law, and they're doing nothing wrong. But imagine how it feels to have a guy like potentially you go into that final interview, and when they say, let's talk about money, and you say, great, let's talk about it. I feel really comfortable here. I think we've established some trust with each other. I know what the Pay Equity Act says. I don't give a damn about that. I'm sure you'll be fair. I'm making $85,000. I need a significant increase to move. If you choose to volunteer your compensation, the Pay Equity Act says it's your right to do that if you see it as a potential advantage. Because think about it. There's times when you're underpaid, where telling them your income is actually an advantage. Or times where you say, I don't want to play games with you. That's the kind of guy I'm going to be. You're hiring somebody that doesn't play games. I'm a straight shooter. I'll prove it to you. I'm making $100,000. Do with that what you will. So if you choose to volunteer it, I'm telling you, I have seen that be used as an advantage. And the feedback from the client is, I want Mike because he was straight up and the rest of these people are playing this Pay Equity Act game. It is a potential advantage. Does that make sense? Okay. And finally this. Look, I get it that recruiters hate change, but I think this makes us more valuable to employers. As this goes from state to state to state, I've had, Jeff will tell you, in Pinnacle, there are people that said, yeah, I hear you because I did a session on it. Jen Lambert did a session on it. I haven't changed it. I'm just not going to. I just don't think it comes up that much. Most candidates are okay with telling me their money. Great. You keep doing that. But now we can add this to the list of why you should work with Hobson Associates. You're never going to have a Pay Equity Act violation. You're never going to have a legal liability. We're going to treat you're never going to lose the candidate who's disappointed that you didn't know the Pay Equity Act when you tried to recruit them. We're going to be able to get access to better candidates. And you're never going to have to worry about Hobson Associates not being compliant with the state-of-the-art ethics and law. I think it gives you some value. And honestly, I think it's going to be to your advantage. Not only is it, as a law, going to work to the advantage of the people it's designed to, it's going to give women equal pay, it's also going to keep companies from basically, jacking these people up and making low offers because you, the agent, told them what they were making. Right? It's a pretty interesting law that a job is worth something. This is what it pays. That's what we're going to pay you, regardless of what you are currently making. The law seems right to me, even though I spent 30 years defending it the other way. Questions or comments on it? Okay, like I said, there's a longer webcast on this. Joanne will get you these slides, but these are the essential slides. And there is a podcast with a lawyer if you want more information. Thank you. Have a great day.